One thing we've done recently, looking more into sponsored ads, cannibalization, specifically with sponsored products, and looking at the incremental impact that spend on particular terms has to understand the actual value behind that spend. And this has always been a question with lots of brands on Amazon is like, for specific terms, if you're already ranked number one, number two for that term, do you need to spend on that term still? And really trying to answer that question as to how much do you need to spend on that term and how much would you just be getting anyway from organic sales. So really going into the numbers behind it and trying to understand what's that perfect level that defends your position, defends competition from moving in, taking over your slots, but doesn't overspend.
It's all killer, no filler. I'm Eric. I'm here with Rob and Clifford from Pilot House's Amazon team. We just made a bunch of sales this weekend on our upcoming C-Suite Mastermind event. We have one of your top clients, I think, who's coming to the event in the pickleball space. That's all I'll say to tease that. We've actually got a podcast with him coming up soon, but super excited to bring some of those people to Victoria for this amazing mastermind event. Hopefully we can get at least one of you guys out there, depending on how nicely you clean up. But anyway, we're talking Amazon today. What's going on in the Amazon world in these dog days of summer?
So they did just have the earnings call on Thursday of last week. And we're kind of at a moment here where the entire tech industry just took a pretty large tumble right after that earnings call. I don't know how related the earnings call was to all of that happening or if that was already going to happen on its own. But from what I could see, like Amazon's still getting some pretty significant growth, like roughly 10% year over year revenue growth. They've doubled profit year over year because now they're actually taking some profit. And last year they were taking very little. So doubling profit isn't a massive accomplishment because it's still a relatively small margin that they're taking. But overall, like the numbers look good. The reason that their share price tanked is they didn't hit quite the analyst expectations, of course, of whatever the analysts had expected them to do, a little bit more than that. And their forward-looking outlook was a little bit less than analysts expected Q3 to come in as. So obviously any sort of downgrade from what analysts expect means that the share price takes a huge fall. So, I mean, overall, though, they're still seeing like massive growth, especially in their advertising business, like 20% year over year growth has been pretty consistent quarter after quarter after quarter for the last like 6-7 quarters. Their advertising revenue has continued to grow. Third-party seller services revenue didn't grow nearly as much as it has in the past. Still grew significantly, but they did implement a whole bunch of new fees that turned off a bunch of sellers and made people stop sending as much stuff in. So there is a few things that happen, but overall, they still seem to be doing pretty well as a business. 10% year over year growth at that scale is kind of insane.
It's unreal. It was funny. I was going through, in our sign up flow on the newsletter, we asked people to share their biggest business challenge. And I saw one last week that was like, trying to convince my CEO that 30% year over year growth isn't always possible. That was his like, big challenge. That's capitalism, baby. First of all, yeah, I would say I'm sure Amazon had something to do with it, but I had a lot to do with this carry trade with the Japanese yen and sort of triggering. People are kind of borrowing Paul to pay Peter in different ways in the economy, and kind of I was trying to understand this idea of the trade market like unraveling a little bit, which is kind of scary. So we'll keep our eyes peeled on how big of an impact this has on the economy. I was saying that I saw, the last 4 years, like, the sort of, I don't know if it was basically like the tech companies and their growth over the last 4 years. So this drop looks like the tiniest little jag down from a mountainous sort of climb that it's made over the last 4 years. So hopefully not a sign of things to come. Nice. We don't usually kick off with topical stuff like that. What are we talking about tactical that we're seeing with some of the client side stuff that we're doing on Amazon at Pilot House?
Yeah, so one thing we've done recently that Clifford led, so he's going to go more into the details on it for sure, but looking more into sponsored ads, cannibalization, specifically with sponsored products, and looking at the impact, the incremental impact that spend on particular terms has to understand the actual value behind that spend. And this has always been a question with lots of brands on Amazon is like, for specific terms, if you're already ranked number one, number two for that term, do you need to spend on that term still? And really trying to answer that question as to how much do you need to spend on that term and how much would you just be getting anyway from organic sales. So really going into the numbers behind it and trying to understand what's that perfect level that defends your position, defends competition from moving in, taking over your slots, but doesn't overspend.
Doesn't cannibalize your organic benefit you're getting, making you pay more. So what was the answer there? What did the analysis look like, Clifford?
Yeah, good question. I wish I had a distinct answer. That would be a nice, simple way to wrap it up.
Yeah, 1.2.
Yeah. More realistically, it did seem. So we did a pretty in-depth analysis. We had a client where post Prime Day, it made sense to turn off all of our sponsored ad spend for a little bit, which is actually an amazing opportunity to pull some of this data with no spend running. What happens? So for those inside Seller Central on Amazon, there's a search query performance dashboard report that you can pull that gives basically your share of purchases that happened when someone searches on any search term. Not every search term, but a lot of them. So what's really interesting is you can then correlate that with what was your spend on this week versus your spend on this week, and how did your share of the total purchases that happened on that search term change. What we found is that on the search terms that we were more highly ranked, so we're in the top, 1 to 4 spots organically, our spend definitely didn't have nearly the incremental effect that our spend had on terms where we weren't in those top 1 to 4 spots. Meaning, we're Nike on the term running shoes, the example we use all the time. If we are already ranked number 1 to 3 on the word running shoes, us spending on running shoes didn't actually result in significantly more sales. There's definitely a gap for sure between spend and no spend, but because it's such a highly competitive term, to get our ad to show up at top of search there is quite expensive. So the incremental spend and actual ROAS that came out of it compared to the sales that happened with no spend at all actually was much lower than it looked like it was in our ad console, because the ROAS that it's giving us is significantly higher because of that cannibalization that was happening. Whereas on terms like, let's say, that same example, we're Nike, let's say we're spending on the word Adidas running shoes, those terms had a much larger incremental effect, where with spend off, basically no sales or very few sales happened. With spend on, huge amount of sales happened. So the incremental effect of the spend was much, much larger, and there was very little cannibalization happening. So the spend was really driving those sales. It really just went to kind of show, although these are terms that if we just followed all the ad console data, we're looking at ROAS there. We're trying to maximize ROAS. We really look at it as a bigger picture. Maybe those words that look like they were our top words aren't actually, because we were just possibly just cannibalizing sales that would have happened anyways.
Interesting. That's a pretty powerful discussion. We talk about this on the Google side as well all the time, like the degree to which you protect your brand. And I guess if you're starting out, there's an argument to be made for, because Amazon is rolling thunder, as we always say, there might be a case to be made for more spend earlier on in the brand. But when you're a big incumbent like this client, or like such a big company like this incumbent, it makes sense. So what are you actually doing? Are you actually lowering a lot of your brand spend for this client and for others at this point?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. So yes, on branded for sure. It seems like we're running the branded test, like branded specifically as a test across a lot of clients right now to see the effect that's having. The results seem to be kind of as would be expected. The more unique their brand name, the more unique their brand search, the less competition they have, the less you have to defend it. Obviously, if there's pretty clear competitors that are relatively, price competitively a good alternative, those you have to defend against a lot harder, of course. So those make more sense to spend more branded into. By what I mean by that is, like, how do I know we have to defend it more? Is when you didn't spend on it, our share of purchases decreased more than other brands where our share of purchases didn't decrease by much when we stopped spending. So there's a pretty distinct difference there, and you can see it in the data. But not only is it causing us to pull back on some words where we're already organically ranked, it's also kind of causing somewhat of a shift in mindset into where we are pushing our ad spend as a whole. Is maybe we don't spend nearly as much on the word running shoes, but we actually spend quite a bit more on these competitor terms like Adidas running shoes. And maybe we spend more into more top of funnel awareness plays like streaming TV and these kind of things that could actually drive more incremental than we had previously thought.
Yeah, this goes to the top of funnel discussions we're always having on the pod. But it's super interesting too that the flip side is that when you bid on other brands' terms, you do take market share, which to me is maybe it's also like a circular argument to like defend your brand better. Because if someone is able, if you're saying, you know, you maybe shouldn't spend as much on your brand, but then if you should spend on going after other people's brands, doesn't that show that you are losing market share to these people that are bidding on your brand term? I guess what you're saying is it didn't really matter whether you had an ad or not in that marketplace. If they're searching for your brand term, they're just as likely to click the organic listing as they would an ad for you versus a competitor.
So you had a really good point there, Eric, in terms of like, if you're spending less and someone else is spending on your term, then they can move in and take that over. So I think if you do go through this scenario and actually reduce spend on certain terms, you do have to pay attention to the data and the competition to make sure that they're not making an aggressive push to move in. Because if everybody just reduced spend on running shoes and then someone came in aggressively and spent a lot of money on it, they could then take over the top organic spot and own a spot that you once held if you're not paying attention to it. So I think you do need to look at the data and be cautious with your reductions in spend and understand, are we maintaining or are we losing ground? Because we know from experience, gaining the ground back is much more difficult than keeping it in the first place.
Super interesting. Clifford, you mentioned streaming TV. We're always talking on the podcast these days about true top of funnel marketing efforts. And I guess if you're spending less on defending your brand terms, that does open up spending for more top of funnel efforts like streaming TV on Amazon. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think there was a recent news story about Prime Video spend being cheaper than Netflix or something like that, or easier, whatever. We are doing a bit more Prime Video across a couple of clients now. What I love about Prime Video spend outside of the whole attribution and how good it is for sales or whatnot is how incredibly disruptive Prime Video ads are. Like, you can't skip them, you can't get away from them. They're straight up like a commercial, but people aren't used to commercials yet on their streaming shows. So they just kind of sit there and watch it.
They stew a little bit. They just stew a little bit that they're having to watch commercials when they're paying for the service.
Yeah, they're not happy about it, but they're watching the ad.
They're watching the ad. I know, I do all the
time. So from that perspective, it is a very high impact ad. It does seem like CPMs are relatively decent, like somewhere I would say in the neighborhood of $25 to $45 CPMs. They're not amazing, but they're not bad, especially if you're basically guaranteeing people are actually seeing that ad. And also, because it's within Amazon, you get pretty good attribution. And not only can you get attribution there, Amazon it's the only place you're going to get attribution from outside spend. That's one huge part of it. Like, you can do Amazon attribution links and ways of tagging things back, but it's never great. So it's basically the only way to get real attribution inside ads sent to Amazon. But second is, what I think people don't realize is a lot of Prime Video ads, you can add attribution to everything else. So you could pixel, basically Amazon pixel your website, your DTC site, get attribution there. And for brands that are big enough to sell in like Whole Foods, you can get Whole Foods attribution in those Prime Video ads. So you could be running that streaming TV ad, and if someone buys from Amazon or your website or inside store in Whole Foods, you're getting that attribution back to that ad campaign. So you have a much better view of how it's operating than you would in almost any other top of funnel scenario.
What is the targeting like with the ads that you're running? Is it retargeting? You know, it's got to be top of funnel. How are you selecting your audiences?
Yeah, so Amazon has pretty deep data, as would be expected, on like everyone. So some will be like, it really depends, I would say, on budget and how big that audience can be. So kind of almost everything you can do, I would say, on the meta side, for the most part, you can do on Amazon. So what's really cool is you can do a lot of competitor retargeting. So you could just pick like your top 10 competitors on Amazon and just market to people who are viewers of those products, but they haven't viewed your product page, for example, or to people who have purchased those sometime in the last 6 months, but not in the last month or something. So you're trying to pull them. Or you can get broader if you have a larger budget that you're trying to spend, which is like the in-market audiences for an entire category, for example, because of course Amazon knows who's been shopping in certain categories. It could be purchasers, it could be, you can do lookalike audiences, all of that. But like for the most part, I'd say low budget, we've stuck to some competitor retargeting because we know they're very much in market and specifically a market for our little niche. Whereas some of the bigger budgets, we've done some broader in market targeting for kind of an entire category.
And was this ready-made TV? This was the clients you tested this on already had TV assets essentially. What was the sort of theme of the ads that you ran for this?
Yeah, I would say they're like polished commercial level ads for sure.
Not a Kanye. I spent all my money on the ad spot. I couldn't afford to create. I bet that would work too. I just think there's that pattern interrupt too, that opportunity in this platform of these inter-streaming things to probably get creative with what you do there. But it is not going to be a direct response creative generally in that moment because they're on their way to do something else. So it's a really probably great opportunity for branding.
Yeah, I'd say so. Also, like I think there's so many people with the Amazon app on their phone now. So as if you do hit the right sort of mix, you can have more of that direct response aspect where it's like they'll open in app if you hit the right person at the right time in their purchase decision cycle. But of course, like being a TV ad, lean more towards awareness and probably get them downstream with another ad.
And it's such a walled garden that they're not even like they're looking over at like iOS 14 privacy issues. Like, like are they subject to the same scrutinization of the, they're not talking about reducing their cookie. I know Google just announced that they're like not reducing their cookie at all. But Amazon just doesn't really have those, like doesn't have the same privacy concerns that a company like Facebook does, I guess, because you're making all these purchases and that data is considered more fair game. Is that, I don't know.
It's just all in their platform. Like your content delivery and purchase happens in the same platform. Same thing with like, I'm sure TikTok Shop likely has the same. Not super as familiar with the TikTok side, but I would assume TikTok Shop has the same advantages where if you're the content platform and you're the purchase platform, you have all the data. You don't need to share it across from one app to another, from one platform to another. You already have it. Like
That's
someone's logged into Prime
yeah.
Video watching the ad, they're logged into the same account that they're logged into when they purchase.
Still bullish on this Amazon company, gotta say. Thank God. I think TV is such a hot issue for a lot of brands right now, and just that idea that like testing into like Amazon is where you want your TV ads in a lot of cases to go to, potentially just because it's the easiest frictionless, the most frictionless path to purchase in a way. So like being able to test streaming TV on Amazon directly into your Amazon shop seems like a really great foot in for brands looking to try TV.
Definitely. And then also for brands that have come up through the similar to myself through the DTC world, and like just selling direct to consumer brands through like actual ads that are attributed to revenue. This is like a step into the awareness world and the TV world while still having that attribution, which from growing up through the DTC side of things is like something that always been focused on. This gives us kind of like starts to meld those two worlds together, which is really cool.
Let's go. If you're listening, we want more clients where we're running streaming TV to their Amazon accounts, so get at us. And I know we're going to have lots of Black Friday, Cyber Monday content programmed over the next several months, but this is maybe our first time mentioning on the Amazon side. So what are some important Black Friday, Cyber Monday deadlines that our listeners need to be aware of?
Yeah, just inventory. Amazon recently published their deadlines for getting your inventory to Amazon to be eligible for Prime Badge for Black Friday, and that is October 19th. So you need to have your inventory in the warehouse by October 19th. Which means there's also going to be a fall Prime event in October, so you should be getting inventory there now for that, or at least soon, to make sure it's there for fall Prime event. And then you're going to want to make sure inventory is there by October 19th for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And then, of course, when you're sending in that inventory, just make sure you've got enough inventory to hold you through the quarter, because we all know when you get into the quarter, there's going to be delays with receiving because Amazon's so busy shipping stuff out. So we'll be mentioning that lots, I'm sure, in the newsletter. I'm sure in the next All Killer No Fillers. But top of mind for us over the next few weeks for sure.
I was just Googled Bezos to see if there's any news. And I see that he is the biggest loser of this stock market sell-off, which is a dubious title. But it also is bringing up the news of, after the 2000 .com crash that Bezos made. He made a very poignant letter to his shareholders or to his employees about that we're a company that wants to be weighted and weighed over time, and we will be. So I think that's exactly what your comments in the starter there pointed to, Clifford, is that this is a blip in their empire probably. So all right, well, thanks guys. I know we've got a new Amazon face coming on our next All Killer No Filler podcast to talk about creative. Really excited about that. So we'll speak to you guys then.
Sweet, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're not getting the D2C newsletter, you can subscribe for free at directtoconsumer.co. And if you want to learn more about Pilot House's all-killer, no-filler services, take off to pilothouse.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.